Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to really get into a stack of dense historical sources and distill the shocking truth of late 19th century America. We're talking the era from 1865 to 1900.
Yeah.
Forget that image of, wide open fields. This is the story of America's complete social and geographical meltdown, really, and rebuild, transforming from a scattered rural republic into this unified urban industrial engine.
It really was a revolution by numbers. I mean, if you want to understand just how fast this happened, look at the population figures.
Okay.
Between 1870 and 1900, the overall U.S. population nearly doubled, which is big in itself.
Huge.
But the population of American cities tripled.
Tripled, yeah.
By the turn of the century, 4 out of 10 Americans were city dwellers. The country was structurally unrecognizable within just 3 decades.
That is staggering. It means America had to fundamentally invent systems to manage density, waste logistics, all while absorbing massive cultural change. So the core question is, how did they physically and, well, psychologically cope with this feverish, unprecedented growth?
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting where it all played out.
Yeah.
The streets.
Well, the growth was immediate and spectacular. In 1860, not a single American city had 1 million people.
Right.
By 1890, New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia all blew past that mark. By 1900, New York housed about 3.5 million people. That made it the world's second largest city.
Incredible. And to handle that kind of density, the city had to fundamentally change shape. It had to grow, like, in 2 ways, up and out. The growth up was all about technology, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You couldn't have those massive skyscrapers, the first one in Chicago, 1885, 10 stories, without a steel skeleton to support the weight.
And crucially, the electric elevator made those heights actually usable.
Right.
Yeah.
Otherwise, who's climbing 10 flights?
Exactly. And that vertical architecture defined a new aesthetic. It was crystallized by the architect Louis Sullivan's famous idea, form follows function. But while they were growing up, they were also expanding out. We saw the death of the compact walking city.
Where everything was close together.
Right. And the birth of the vast megalopolis. All thanks to mass transit, like electric trolleys, people could suddenly live far from where they worked.
And Boston even debuted the nation's first subway system, though London had beaten them to it by a few decades, I think.
That's right. London led the way in 1863.
So this city life had a powerful pull. The siren song, as the sources call it.
Yeah.
It wasn't just industrial jobs, right?
No, not at all. It was the glitter, the promise of independence, especially for young adults. And then there was the spread of amazing new technology. Indoor plumbing, electricity.
Cell phones went from almost 0 to over 1 million by 1900.
Just imagine. And even the infrastructure itself became a point of pride. You had these engineering marvels like the Brooklyn Bridge, dedicated in 1883, a huge symbol.
And this urban concentration, it just supercharged consumerism.
Oh, absolutely. Department stores like Macy's, Marshall Field's, they became destinations in themselves. It marked a definitive cultural shift.
Away from that rural thriftiness.
Mending clothes, buying only necessities, yeah. Towards an urban culture defined by throwaway packaging, cheap, ready-to-wear clothing, and, well, just generating waste.
And here's where the glamour immediately meets the grit, the darker side. This density created chaos. Cities struggled with crime, uncollected garbage, impure water. And here's a fact that just sticks with me. A single draft horse could emit up to 50 pounds of manure daily.
50 pounds. Imagine thousands of horses. The filth on the streets must have been unbelievable.
Unimaginable today.
And the worst conditions were often in housing. You had the dumbbell tenement perfected around 1879, 7 or 8 stories high.
Designed just to pack people in.
Exactly. Multiple families sharing a single hall toilet, the WC, and the only ventilation, these shallow, sunless air shafts, basically fire traps.
Which brings us to things like the devastating Chicago fire of 1871. Left 90,000 people homeless. A terrifying reminder of these urban hazards.
Yeah, and it prompted new building requirements, downtown stone and iron, which, interestingly, also helped push the wealthier residents out to the semi-rural suburbs.
And that urban chaos, it was just amplified by this incredible global influx of people. Over 5 million immigrants arrived in the 1880s alone.
5 million in 1 decade.
But here's the wild part, though. The face of immigration completely changed around then.
Exactly. Before the 1880s, most immigrants were the old immigrants, mainly from the British Isles, Western Europe.
And quite a few Chinese, though they were legally excluded starting in 1882.
Right. But between 1880 and 1920, the new immigrants became dominant. They hailed from Southern and Eastern Europe, Italians, Jews, Croats, Slovaks, Greeks, Poles. This group went from being about 19% of immigrants in the 1880s
Only 19%.
to comprising 66%, two-thirds, by the first decade of the 20th century. It was a massive cultural and demographic shift. And, importantly, many came from places without much experience with democratic governance.
You know, I never quite considered this, but the sources show the push and pull factors were really interconnected. European populations exploded, partly because of American food imports like the potato.
Ah, the humble potato.
Right. Then European industrialization displaced traditional peasants, pushed them into their own overcrowded cities, and eventually many came across the ocean.
And the powerful pull factor was this America fever. It was fueled by America letters sent home detailing opportunity.
Plus freedom from things like forced military conscription and religious persecution.
Powerful motivators.
Let's look at two key groups just to illustrate the diversity of experience here. 4 million Italians came over.
4 million.
And what's fascinating is that about half, maybe more, were young men who actually intended to earn money quickly and then go back home, repatriate.
Yeah, the birds of passage. Many did go back, unlike, say, the Jewish immigrants.
And they often found jobs as industrial laborers through something called the Padrone system, right? Where a labor boss secured their work upon arrival.
That's right. And despite some government efforts to get them into farming, they really clustered tightly in urban little Italies, preserving their culture.
Now, the Jewish experience was fundamentally different.
Very different. They were fleeing savage persecutions, pogroms, mainly from Russian and Polish areas.
So push factors were paramount.
Absolutely. And crucially, they were kind of unique among the new immigrants because many arrived with established urban skills, tailoring, shopkeeping, things like that. They'd often lived in towns or cities in Europe.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
And they generally came intending to stay permanently. They brought their families, establishing deep roots in the American cities.
Okay, so you have millions of desperate people arriving in cities that are already bursting at the seams, riddled with crime, and literally covered in filth.
A recipe for disaster.
And because state and federal governments did almost nothing to help with this assimilation process, a huge failure of governance, really a power vacuum opened up.
And that vacuum was perfectly filled by the political machines. Think of New York's notorious Tammany Hall.
Right. Corrupt bosses trading favors for votes.
Exactly. While reformers, rightly condemned their cynical, corrupt nature, the machines acted as the only de facto social welfare system available for many immigrants.
They provided the essentials people needed. Jobs, housing, food, maybe some coal in the winter.
Even help getting out of minor scrapes with the law, all in exchange for one thing: their guaranteed vote come election day.
But the plight of the urban poor wasn't entirely ignored by, let's say, civil society, though. We see this massive awakening of the social conscience, notably with the social gospel movement.
Yes, this is where Protestant clergymen began applying Christian lessons directly to the problems of the slums and factories. People like Walter Rauschenbusch and Washington Gladden.
Arguing that ethics and social justice were central to faith, not just about saving souls for the afterlife.
Precisely. Some even suggested that socialism might be the logical outcome of true Christian principles applied to society.
And this intellectual movement spurred practical action. Jane Addams is the key figure here.
Absolutely. In 1889, she founded Hull House in Chicago. It became the most famous of the settlement houses.
Which were like community centers, basically.
Kind of, but much more. They offered English instruction, childcare for working mothers, counseling, cultural activities. They were lifelines in these neighborhoods.
And her work, alongside others like Lillian Wald, who opened the Henry Street settlement in New York.
And Florence Kelley, who started at Hull House and became a fierce advocate, lobbying successfully for an anti-sweatshop law in Illinois.
They essentially birthed the modern profession of social work.
You could definitely argue that they were pioneers.
Unfortunately, though, this era of growth also saw a really nasty backlash, this ferocious resurgence of nativism, anti-immigrant feeling.
Nativists feared the new immigrants' high birth rate. They worried that the, quote, Anglo-Saxon stock would be outbred and outvoted or somehow mongrelized. Awful rhetoric.
Yeah, really ugly stuff. And this fear fueled organizations like the American Protective Association, the APA, founded in 1887.
Which actively campaigned against Roman Catholic political candidates, seeing them as puppets of the Pope.
And this xenophobia quickly translated into actual law. Federal acts in 1882 barred paupers, criminals, and convicts.
And most famously, another law in the same year barred virtually all Chinese immigrants, a total exclusion.
Organized labor also got involved, pushing through a ban on importing foreign workers under contract in 1885. They worried about depressed wages.
Right. And nativists desperately wanted a literacy test to restrict the new immigrants, who often lacked formal education. But it was actually vetoed by 3 different presidents.
Before finally being enacted in 1917, just as America entered World War I.
Which creates this powerful, terrible irony when you realize that just a few decades earlier, in 1886, the Statue of Liberty was dedicated.
Bearing Emma Lazarus's inscription, welcoming the huddled masses yearning to breathe free.
While at the same time, nativists were actively describing those very newcomers as the scum of Europe washing up on American shores. A real contradiction.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. The need for a literate workforce and maybe a more stable citizenry spurred this massive expansion in public education, right?
Yes, absolutely. By 1900, more states had compulsory grade school education laws. This helped check child labor to some extent.
And it had a real impact on literacy. The rate fell from 20% in 1870 to under 11% by 1900.
A significant drop.
Yeah.
And higher education exploded too, supported both by government action and new industrial wealth.
The Morrill Act of 1862 was key here, providing federal land grants for state universities.
That's how institutions like Ohio State and the University of California got their start, land grant colleges. And the Hatch Act later supported agricultural experiment stations at these colleges.
Plus, you had massive philanthropy. The new industrial millionaires, people like John D. Rockefeller, poured fortunes into founding or expanding universities like the University of Chicago.
Yeah, a huge wave of private money went into higher ed. And we also saw the rise of serious professional graduate schools. Johns Hopkins University, founded in 1876, led the way. They modeled themselves after the rigorous German university tradition, focusing on research.
Intellectually, this era was really defined by William James, a Harvard faculty member.
A giant figure. He published Principles of Psychology in 1890, basically pioneering modern behavioral psychology.
But his most famous concept was pragmatism.
Yes. James argued that the truth of an idea shouldn't be judged by, abstract philosophical standards, but by its practical consequences. Does it work? What are its effects in the real world?
A very American philosophy in a way, results-oriented.
It was hailed as America's greatest contribution to global thought at the time. Pragmatism.
Yet, amidst all this progress, the path forward for African Americans remained incredibly fractured. You had 2 dominant opposing voices.
That's right. First, Booker T. Washington, an ex-slave himself, head of the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama.
His approach was accommodationist. He taught trades, focused on economic self-respect and security.
His belief or strategy was that by developing economic resources, proving their worth through hard work and skills, civil rights and social equality would eventually follow. He essentially acquiesced in segregation for the time being to achieve that economic base.
And he was famously assisted by the brilliant agricultural scientist George Washington Carver at Tuskegee.
Finding new uses for crops like peanuts and soybeans, yeah.
But this approach was fiercely criticized by W.E.B. Du Bois.
Fiercely. Du Bois was the first black man to earn a PhD from Harvard, a towering intellectual.
And he attacked Washington, calling him an Uncle Tom for accepting segregation.
Du Bois demanded immediate and complete social and economic equality. No waiting. He argued that the talented 10th, the most capable black leaders, should have immediate access to the American mainstream, lead the fight for rights.
And he later helped found the NAACP in 1909.
Right. This divide really reflected 2 fundamentally opposing visions for achieving civil rights, a tension that, continues in different forms throughout American history.
Meanwhile, the traditional religious world was being rocked by Charles Darwin.
Oh, absolutely. His theory of natural selection, published back On the Origin of Species in 1859, directly rejected the literal biblical account of creation, the dogma of special creations.
It caused a huge uproar and forced a split in religious communities.
It did. You had conservatives who clung to biblical literalism. This laid the groundwork for modern fundamentalism later on.
And then you had liberal Protestants who adapted. They started to interpret the Bible less literally, focus more on ethics, and many aligned their message with the social gospel movement we talked about.
Finding ways to reconcile faith and modern science.
And while older faiths were kind of splintering or adapting, new faiths were growing significantly.
Yeah, by 1900, Roman Catholics had become the largest single denomination in the U.S., largely due to that new immigration.
And we also saw the rise of groups like the Salvation Army, arriving from England in 1879, focusing on practical aid to the poor.
And entirely new movements like Christian Science, founded by Mary Baker Eddy with her book Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures in 1879, a time of great religious ferment.
The tension was everywhere, wasn't it? Including in moral codes. You had these outspoken advocates of free love, like Victoria Woodhull publishing her weekly in 1871,
Challenging all sorts of conventions.
pitted against these self-appointed guardians of purity like Anthony Comstock. He championed the federal Comstock Law in 1873.
And boasted about confiscating obscene materials and arresting people, a real culture war brewing.
Amidst this friction, women's status was undeniably changing. You saw soaring divorce rates.
People marrying later.
And declining birth rates, interestingly, in both city and rural areas.
Yeah, families were getting smaller across the board, and thinkers like Charlotte Perkins Gilman tackled this head-on. Her book, Women in Economics from 1898, was groundbreaking.
What did she argue?
She called for women to abandon their economic dependency on men. And she advocated for practical, cooperative solutions like centralized nurseries and shared kitchens to free women from domestic drudgery. Pretty radical ideas for the time.
Definitely. And the suffrage movement also adopted a pragmatic new face.
Right. Carrie Chapman Catt leading the National American Woman Suffrage Association, or NASA.
Formed in 1890, uniting earlier groups.
She argued that suffrage wasn't just about some abstract notion of inherent rights. It was a necessary tool for what she called city housekeeping.
City housekeeping.
Yeah, the idea that women needed the vote to effectively protect their families, influence public health policy, clean up corruption in the massive, chaotic urban environment. A very practical argument.
Clever. The Wyoming Territory had actually led the way, granting the first unrestricted suffrage way back in 1869.
True, the West was often ahead on that front. And we absolutely must remember Ida B. Wells.
A crucial figure.
After 1892, she launched this fierce, courageous anti-lynching campaign, using journalism and statistics to expose the horror. She later helped found the National Association of Colored Women in 1896, a vital voice for Black women's rights and racial justice.
And alongside suffrage, we also saw the continuing zeal of the temperance movement.
Trying to ban alcohol. You had the National Prohibition Party formed back in 1869, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the WCTU, founded in 1874, led by the very effective organizer Frances E. Willard.
But the most memorable figure might be Carrie A. Nation, the Kansas Cyclone.
Ah, yes, with her hatchet. She brought a whole different kind of energy and notoriety to the cause by literally smashing up saloons.
Quite the image. And the Anti-Saloon League formed in 1893, becoming a very powerful single-issue lobbying force.
Culturally, the cities created this massive demand for information and entertainment.
Technology met that demand. The invention of the linotype machine in 1885 made printing much faster and cheaper.
Which led directly to mass circulation newspapers and the era of sensationalism or yellow journalism.
Right. Newspaper tycoons like Joseph Pulitzer, with his New York World featuring that comic strip, The Yellow Kid.
Hence yellow journalism.
And William Randolph Hearst, building this huge chain starting with the San Francisco Examiner. They competed fiercely, using sex, scandal, human interest stories, anything to boost circulation.
And this climate also produced some really influential reform literature. Henry George's Progress and Poverty from 1879 was a massive bestseller.
How was his big idea?
He argued for a single 100% tax on the profits landowners made simply from rising land values. He thought this would eliminate poverty and inequality. A radical proposal, but it captured millions of readers.
And Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward, the socialist utopia novel from 1888.
Yeah, describing a future America in the year 2000 where big business was nationalized and everyone lived in harmony. Hugely popular, too.
In literature proper, realism was the dominant movement, capturing authentic American life. Writers like Mark Twain, William Dean Howells.
And Henry James took it a step further, mastering what's called psychological realism, focusing on the complex inner lives and social maneuvering of his characters, often Americans in Europe.
Later, you get naturalism emerging, applying a kind of detached, almost scientific objectivity to the often grim realities of urban life and forces beyond individual control.
Right. Think of Stephen Crane's Maggie, A Girl of the Streets, or Theodore Dreiser's Sister Carrie. Bleaker stuff, often showing characters crushed by their environment.
Artistically, you had painters like Winslow Homer capturing the rugged realism of the sea.
And sculptors like Augustus St. Gaudens, famous for the Robert Gould Shaw Memorial in Boston. Powerful works.
And finally, city planners and architects tried to bring some order to the chaos. people like Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed Central Park.
And proponents of the City Beautiful movement, they try to introduce harmony, often copying grand European styles, Beaux-Arts classicism, for instance.
This effort really culminated, or was symbolized by, Daniel Burnham's World Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893.
The White City, a massive, coordinated neoclassical vision. It was meant to show off American progress and impose a sense of order, and it drew an incredible 27 million visitors.
Oh, and for just plain amusement, Americans turned to mass leisure activities.
Yeah, things like vaudeville theater with its variety acts. Circuses became huge spectacles. Barnum and Bailey merged in 1881 to create the greatest show on earth.
Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West shows were incredibly popular, featuring sharpshooters like Annie Oakley, kind of mythologizing the disappearing frontier.
Absolutely. And sports. Baseball solidified itself as the national pastime. Basketball was actually invented by James Naismith in 1891 in Massachusetts.
And bicycling became a huge craze, offering a new sense of freedom and independence, especially for women. Hashtag tag tag outro.
So ultimately, these 3 decades, roughly, following the Civil War, were just defined by dizzying demographic change, incredible technological advancement, and deep cultural conflict. Whether that was the clash between Darwinism and traditional faith, or nativism versus immigration, or these new urban moral codes clashing with old Victorian standards, constant friction.
It really is the ultimate paradox, isn't it? The explosion of cities created incredible diversity and also segregation. You know, the little Italies, the distinct urban ghettos we talked about. But at the same time, the shared simultaneous experience of mass media, reading the same newspapers, national sports, standardized shopping in department stores, it also created a more uniform, common American popular culture than had ever existed before.
That's a great point, a homogenizing effect alongside the diversification.
So here is a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. Reflect once more on that conflict between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois regarding the best path forward for African Americans. Given the really entrenched urban racism and the economic disparity of that era, which strategy do you think was actually the more radical proposition for that specific time? Was it Washington's gradual economic uplift through accommodation, or Du Bois' demand for immediate full social and political equality?
A difficult choice, perhaps, between 2 necessary paths, seen differently depending on the context of the times. Something definitely worth pondering.
Indeed. Thank you for diving deep with us into the dramatic, messy, and transformative making of modern urban America.